Hello again, I'm Dr. Tim Cooper from the University of the Fraser Valley Physics Department. Welcome to the third and final instalment of my series on climate change. The first one was about the science of climate change, in which I shared with you some of the information that we have on climate change, some of the numbers, such as how much warmer the world is now than it was, and also looked at some predictions for the future, which were a little bit scary. The need to take action is clear. In the second one of the series, we talked about politics, which is how we kind of fail, and economics, which talks about how we could succeed. But economics by itself doesn't do anything. Economics sets up incentives that drive new developments, new technologies, and the installation of those technologies. So this is the third in the series. It's my happy place because as a physicist, I love technology. So let me talk about this and we'll see how it goes. Okay? Trust me, it's not technical. You'll be fine. Okay. So the question is, of course, can we substitute for fossil fuels? Well, here we have a graph which we saw also in part 2. And it shows where in Canada the emissions are coming from. The biggest source is the oil and gas industry. And I'm not going to talk about that, actually, because there's not much we can do about it. I'm going to focus on the next three biggest, which is transportation, buildings, and electricity. Those three. And I'm going to start with electricity. If we can eliminate or really significantly reduce the fossil fuel emissions from electricity, transportation and buildings, then of course we'll need way less fossil fuels, and that then will automatically shrink the oil and gas industry. So that's the plan. Electricity first. Here we go. Well, the first fossil fuel to talk about is coal. Coal is used almost exclusively for electricity. Some is used in the making of steel, and there are ways around using coal and steel, using hydrogen instead, but I won't talk about that because the big one at the moment is coal in electricity, although not so much for Canada. What can we do to generate electricity that doesn't use coal? Well, this picture shows a windmill, typically of a wind farm. A wind farm built with just one or two windmills would be very inefficient. So you normally have hundreds or even thousands. And here you have a solar farm, solar panels. The way to make wind and solar cheap is to have massive farms of windmills and massive farms of photovoltaic panels. Both of these will generate electricity more cheaply than coal or any other method. In fact, last year, a remarkable statistic came out. The solar industry was now generating electricity cheaper than anyone ever has in the history of electricity. So solar is definitely cheap, and the good news is it's getting cheaper. It's going to go down by another factor of at least 40%, possibly more. Likewise, wind. In 2019, 72% of all the world's new electricity generation came from renewables. In 2020, it was about 90%. So what's the problem? Why the world is already switching to wind and solar? Well, yeah, but Canada isn't. We're slow on that one. We need to be able to do something. But the world is moving, and that's good news. Now, whether it's moving fast enough, that's another question, but it's moving. Here I have a graph just showing you the cost of solar electricity. This is in the United States, but it's similar in Canada. And you can see that there are three forms of solar. Residential, where you put panels on your roof and just generate your own electricity for the house. Commercial, where you take your big commercial flat roof and you generate enough electricity for your industry. And utility scale, which is where you do these massive, massive arrays. And you can see from the graph that utility scale is way cheaper. That's the way to go. Should you, you're thinking, be a good person and put solar panels on your roof of your house here in Chilliwack? Yeah, you can, definitely. It would be a good thing to do, but it would be way cheaper to organize with other homeowners and build a massive solar power array somewhere else. Where else? Well, the desert's the best place where the sun shines. And so somewhere around the Okanagan or somewhere around Kamloops would be perfect. There's a huge resource we're just simply not going for. Our governments are just not interesting. If you look at the shape of these curves on the graph, how the price is coming down, it's an illustration of something called Wright's law. Every doubling of the amount of productivity, in this case of solar panels, results in a fixed percentage drop. We know how much room there is to continue doubling the supply of solar panels, so we have a pretty good idea what the price will be in the future. Wright's law applies to many different products, not just solar panels. It's one of the standard things you learn in economics. The next slide, I have a picture of the cost of generating electricity from different sources. I'll leave you to freeze the talk and look at it later. But the bottom line is the cheapest way of generating electricity is now from wind and solar. Other ways of doing it, like nuclear, I think they're exciting, they're wonderful ways of doing it, but it's really expensive in comparison to wind and solar. So it's even now cheaper to take an existing natural gas plant or coal plant and knock it down. Even though it's working perfectly, knock it down, build solar. It's cheaper. That's a wonderful position to be in. And in fact, that's what everybody would be doing if the fossil fuels were not being artificially subsidized to tilt the market. But that was the result of my miserable presentation or presentation of the misery in episode 2. Again, here's just a graph showing you the levelized cost of energy coming from wind and solar and dropping very, very quickly. Last summer, just over a year ago now, it's 2021 now, it's in 2020, the United Arab Emirates decided they were going to make some money because they have a desert, and it turns out that's really valuable. We tend to think of that region as oil producing, and of course it is, but they're going to build a 5 gigawatt solar power plant. 5 gigawatts, that's big. That's 5 times our Site C here in British Columbia. So with that, they're going to take the electricity, make hydrogen, and export the hydrogen to Europe. Their solar plant will generate electricity at 1.35 US cents a kilowatt hour, or roughly 1.7 Canadian cents a kilowatt hour. If you check your electricity bill, you're probably paying about 10 cents Canadian, not 1.75. You can see how cheap this has become. It's really quite amazing. Speaking of Site C, which is a hydro dam on the Peace River, a little bit controversial because of the valley that's being flooded and other problems, it will be generating electricity something like about 14 cents a kilowatt hour. So our politicians have chosen to make electricity at 14 cents instead of 2 or 3 or 4 cents, whatever it would be. We in Canada cannot reproduce the same pricing that the United Arab Emirates do because they're a desert and they're nearer the equator. They have some advantages, but we're not that far away. Well, here's a picture of a nuclear power plant with 2 happy faces on. I started giving presentations 17 years ago, and nuclear power at the time looked like a really good thing. Moment of confession from me, I'm a nuclear physicist. I've always done research in nuclear physics. I love nuclear power. I love the applications of nuclear physics, which nuclear power is one. But in all honesty, wind and solar have become so much cheaper now than nuclear can. Its day, I think, has gone. Okay, so that's how we get rid of coal. Easy enough. How do we get rid of natural gas? Natural gas is used to generate electricity, and we've already seen that wind and solar are now cheaper. In fact, wind and solar combined with battery for storage even is cheaper than natural gas. That's huge. How can you get rid of the need to burn natural gas to heat buildings? The house that I bought when I moved in was heated with a natural gas furnace. I've now got a heat pump. But I still have the natural gas supplied to the house. And my heat pump is kind of wonky. It's a very old one, not a very good one. I wouldn't recommend it to anybody. The new ones are great. If you have a less than 10-year-old heat pump, it can work down to minus 23 degrees Celsius. Here in Chilliwack, the number of days where it gets below minus 23 are very few and far between. In fact, I can't bring one to mind. So a heat pump will work always in Chilliwack. Why not? Use a heat pump, you're using electricity instead of natural gas. And one of the reasons is that, well, actually it might cost you slightly more to use a heat pump than natural gas. Why is that? Well, because there's a massive subsidy on natural gas by the provincial government, but there's no subsidy on electricity. In fact, here in BC, we have an interesting situation. It's called the two-step system for billing in residences. The first amount of electricity I use costs me about 9 cents a kilowatt hour. But if I start using more than an average house of the same size, then I'm going to have to start paying 14 cents a kilowatt hour. And a house that has a heat pump, and in my case an electric car as well, then yeah, I'm paying for the expensive electricity. So the whole system appears to be geared to encouraging me to pollute, which is really strange. I couldn't help but show you this picture. It's called an Arctic heat pump, and this one works down to minus 30 degrees Celsius. So it's not just Chilliwack. Many other places in Canada can now use heat pumps. There are other better systems than air-to-air heat pumps, such as I've been showing you, that are more expensive, such as geothermal, but still they work. Well, so natural gas we don't really need to use. Coal we don't need to use. The remaining one is oil. How do we stop using oil? Well, oil is used primarily for transportation. I'd like to show you this picture of this really good-looking fellow with his smart and recently cleaned electric car. So in his hand is a plug which will charge the car up. And to charge that car, it costs me about $1.50 to fill up. Now, I don't get to go a full distance that a gasoline car would do with a full tank. So obviously the $1.50 figure is a bit misleading. But I can tell you this, the fuel cost per kilometre is 7 times cheaper with an electric car than with a gasoline car. So actually, I'm getting really cheap motoring compared to you if you run a gasoline car. Now, you may have been told, oh, but electric cars are so expensive. And you know what? To buy them, they are more expensive. But then over the life of the vehicle, you pay very little to maintain them, very little to fuel them. So at the end of the life of the vehicle, you've got cheaper transportation had you gone electric than gasoline. And guess what? That price is going to go down even more in the future. Here I have a graph of the cost of a lithium-ion battery pack. Strictly speaking, it's the cost per kilowatt hour. And you can see that over 10 years ago, it was $1,200. Now it's gone down by a factor of 10. As we have increased the production of lithium-ion batteries, Wright's law has taken over and the price has come down according to Wright's law. Look at that beautiful smooth curve. And again, using Wright's law, we can then figure out where this cost is going. It's definitely going below $100, which is the rule of thumb where the initial cost of an electric car will equal the cost of a gasoline car. But it's almost certainly heading past $80, in which case electric cars will not only be cheaper to run, cheaper to maintain, they'll be cheaper to buy. So the future looks good. Already you'd be crazy to buy a gasoline car because you're going to pay a lot more for all the pollution you're going to do, despite the subsidies on your fuel. Well, the next picture is the Tesla Semi. I just wanted to show you this picture, first of all, because it's cool, and also because of the numbers. The battery technology for Tesla has changed. It used to be this thing was going to be 800 kilometers range. Now it's about 1,000 kilometers. That's perfect. That's about 1 day's driving. You then charge up overnight. So this thing has a range of 1,000 kilometers. The cost is going to be about $180,000. That's US dollars. But over the lifetime of it, you're going to save $200,000 in diesel and maintenance. In other words, hey, anyone want a free truck? That's really what it is. You can see the future is here. And Tesla will be producing Cybertrucks in bulk later on this year, which is 2021. But it's not just cars and trucks. Let me share with you some of my favorite pictures of electric vehicles. We have the Rivian. It's a pickup truck. It's already available. The Ford F-150 electric is coming out. It's going to cost $40,000 US, have a range of about 350 kilometers, and cost almost nothing to run. It's a wonderful new game. If you are taking a girl out to the drive-in movie, go in one of these electric excavators. They're very quiet and you can watch from the cab. She'll be very impressed. If you're into farming, tractors don't have to be diesel. This one's electric. On the railways, we've now got, and I just came across this one recently, the locomotive is purely electric with batteries. When you hook this up to other locomotives in a chain, it will save 11% of your fuel. This is a prototype. The next one's coming out with more batteries on board. It'll be saving 25% fuel. That revolution is just beginning. Here we have a garbage truck picture, 400 kilometers range. Wow, runs all day. Garbage trucks are perfect for electrification because they stop, start, stop, start, stop, start all the time. When you slow down an electric vehicle, all the energy that you use to speed up, almost all of it, about 80%, goes back into the battery when you slow down. So for any vehicle that's doing stop-starts, it's fantastic. You could now take an electric airplane to Victoria. The bus, shown in the picture, can go over 1,000 miles on a single charge. It's perfectly silent, non-polluting. That's important in cities, especially in China, where 99% of the world's electric buses are, because they really keep the air clear. BC Hydro's even has a plug-in hybrid. It's not completely fully electric yet, but it does. Okay, so let me conclude the technology part of it and also some of the earlier parts. The planet is warming dangerously. Okay? We are choosing for it to warm the planet dangerously by subsidizing rather than taxing fossil fuels. Future generations will look back at this time and call it the time of insanity. They really will. We need rapid action. We have only now 9 years left to reduce our emissions in Canada by a significant amount. The ethical amount would be a factor of 6. We'll do what we can. We should do what we can. And we have to do that soon because we can't do it later. And as a physicist, of course, I'm going to conclude this part of my presentation with an Einstein quote. Those who have the privilege to know, which is now you, have the duty to act. And I want to talk about a few things that you can do. Well, that's a quote that works on my older generation. For the younger ones, there's no fate but what we make for ourselves. That was Sarah Connor in The Terminator. And it is true. The only thing that you can do to guarantee failure to make the transition would be to do nothing. So please help out. So what can we do? I have a few last ideas to finish off with. Well, we've locked in quite a lot of pain already. I'm sorry for the younger generation. I really am. And I do apologize to you for what my generation has done to yours. It's not forgivable. Don't even think about forgiving us. Just learn to deal with it as best you can. You will have pain, but what we can do is to reduce the increase in your pain by trying to curtail future emissions. There's an awful lot of things out there which I call distractions. The fossil fuel industry has put an awful lot of stories out there that, this is the problem, that's the problem, it's cows, it's trees, no, it's not, it's this. Basically, the problem is carbon atoms are coming out of the ground, where they've been kept down there for 100 million years, and they're coming out into the air. They form carbon dioxide, and it heats the planet. Sometimes, once those carbon dioxides are out in the air, they'll go into the ocean, but then they'll come back out again. They'll go into the vegetation, then they'll come back out again. So what we need to do is to stop the carbon atoms coming from underground into the air. What doesn't help is moving the carbon atoms around once they are outside of the ground, once they're in the air. Okay? So if we move carbon from the biosphere, i.e. plants, animals, etc., to and from the atmosphere, it doesn't help because carbon is going atmosphere, biosphere, hydrosphere. In other words, air, people, plants, water. It's moving around all the time. So if we decide to take action to say, well, the problem is carbon dioxide in the air, let's put it into the plants, let's plant a tree, it's not going to help really because it's not going to stay in the tree. If you dissolve it in the ocean, it won't stay there, not forever. It'll come back. What you're doing is essentially what my generation used to call rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. Let me give you an example. Fossil fuel industry is probably behind it, I suspect they are, has told everybody, look, don't worry, plant trees. When the trees grow, they'll absorb carbon dioxide. And the worst thing about that sort of lie is that it's actually the truth. But the thing is, how much carbon dioxide? If we took, and this came from Michael Mann's new book, it's his calculation, if we took all of the earth that we don't need right now for planting food and planted trees on it, those trees, that would be a fantastic thing, all over the earth, forestation. Those trees would absorb about 4 gigatons of carbon dioxide per year. 4 gigatons, that sounds like a lot, doesn't it? And that would actually need about 1 billion hectares. But okay, we've got that. So we could get trees absorbing 4 gigatons of carbon dioxide a year. Sounds good. But do you remember in part 2, I told you that we as a species are emitting 42 gigatons a year. In other words, even at their maximum rate of absorption, those trees could absorb 1/11th as much carbon dioxide as we emit in fossil fuels. It's the wrong order of magnitude. You can't get there. Moreover, trees don't live forever. They die. And when they die, they fall to the forest floor, they rot, and pretty much all that carbon, a little bit remains sequestered in the soil, but the vast majority of it comes back out. And of course, with climate change here in British Columbia, we know very well, trees often don't get to die and fall over. They burn right where they are because our heated climate has dried out the forests, dried out the wood and the trees. So they burn. And of course, when a tree burns, it's going to give its carbon dioxide back right away. So I don't mean to knock tree planting. It's a good thing to do for many environmental reasons. It's just that it's not going to solve climate change. Certainly not by itself. Another finger that gets pointed is at the beef industry. And yeah, it's probably good to give up beef for a whole bunch of reasons. But the beef industry is estimated to be responsible for about 6% of our emissions. 6% of our global warming comes from the beef industry. And most of that is accredited to cows' burps. When a cow burps, it burps out methane. And methane, if you recall, can trap 120 times as much infrared radiation, i.e. as much heat, as carbon dioxide. So these cows are massive sources of methane. That sounds really bad. But it's still only 6% of our emissions. Moreover, methane, if you recall from the science section, has a half-life of 12 years. So once you undergo several halves lives, that factor of 120 becomes basically 1. So your 6% gets to be 6% divided by 100, so it becomes more like 6 divided by 100, 0.058%. It's really not a big deal. The carbon dioxide emissions from cows burping, it's insignificant in the long run. It is significant in the short run. In the short run, we've got to avoid those feedbacks. So yes, maybe there's something to be done here, but again, it's not really the big problem. It's not going to cause that much trouble in the long run, as long as it doesn't trigger a feedback. Another favorite solution is carbon capture and storage. It sounds great, doesn't it? Let's build a machine that will pull carbon dioxide out of the Earth's atmosphere and turn it back into something which we can bury underground. Well, it does cost at a minimum $200, that's the US dollars, by the way, maybe $300 per ton of carbon dioxide. Where's that money going to come from? Well, the taxpayer, of course. So are you okay to pay $200 to $300 a ton to have this carbon dioxide taken out of the air? Well, all too many consumers, especially those who work in the oil industry, would argue, well, we can't have a carbon tax of that much money, it's too much. But you'd need the carbon tax to raise the money, at $300, to raise the money to sequester it at $300. So who pays for it? Either the taxpayer or the industry. I personally come from the view, polluter pays. The industry should pay that. And let's see if they do. So what can federal government do? I'm going to talk about the federal government, the provincial government, and individuals. The federal government can do quite a lot. Right now, they're subsidizing fossil fuels to the tune of about $40 billion US dollars a year. I think that's 56 last time I worked it out, billion Canadian dollars. Wow, that'd be massive if they just stopped the subsidies. Okay. Our carbon tax federally is only $40 a ton. We need to increase that. They could certainly do that. In Paris, we've made a very moderate promise, totally inappropriate considering the scale of our emissions. We really should get serious and take a real pledge to Paris or the next conference to promise to the rest of the world that we're going to do better, because we sure haven't done well so far. Okay? That would then trigger other countries to match it and move. And all throughout my discussions here, I've never really spoken about the government subsidizing anything else. I just wanted them to stop subsidizing fossil fuels. But I have to say that if the government took about $4 billion, and this is my calculation, and I'm a physicist, not an economist, so take that with a grain of salt, but $4 billion, we could build a high voltage DC power line, Vancouver to Montreal, or even Quebec City actually, to carry 4 gigawatts for $4 billion. What would that allow? Well, if you've got a power line going from Vancouver all the way to Quebec City, then all the way along that line, you can have solar farms and wind farms that could feed into that line. That would take the power from the farms into the cities. So just think of this. Alberta, which has the sunniest part of Canada, could become an energy powerhouse for Canada instead of the total mess that it is now. It would generate so many jobs and so much economic activity, Alberta would even start contributing netly to federation. Right now, although they complain bitterly about the equalization payments, the fossil fuel subsidies that come their way certainly make up for that. This would be fantastic. You may say, but you don't want to have the federal government paying $4 billion for that. But they're paying $20 billion for the Trans Mountain pipeline to bring bitumen from Alberta through to Vancouver. I just mention it. It's clean is cheap. That's really important. Anyway, what can the province do? Well, here in BC, we are subsidizing fossil fuels to the tune, mostly the gas industry, to the tune of about $1 billion a year. Most of that is through royalty waivers and royalty credits. It gets very technical very fast, and I don't want to go into that just yet, partly because it's very technical and very confusing, and also partly because I haven't totally figured it all out, to be truthful, but other folks have. Use Google fossil fuel subsidies in BC, you'll see what I mean. Okay. We could raise our provincial carbon tax at only $45 a tonne up to something more reasonable. Try to emulate Europe, for example. We burn a lot of fossil fuels, like natural gas, for example, heating buildings. Well, if we had buildings like in Europe, which we're now building, where they're building passive houses that don't need external heating, we wouldn't need to heat them. People living in those houses would pay a little bit more for the house because it would be super insulated, but then they'd more than make the money back in saved fuel bills. Why on earth don't we do that? It is really peculiar to me. The other thing, which I would encourage, is that when people understand the physics of climate change, they usually end up taking action. We need to make sure that our students in all the high schools learn about STEM, science, technology, engineering, mathematics, if we can. It isn't for everybody, not everybody can handle it, not everybody likes it, but we certainly want to encourage as much STEM as possible, because that then does drive people to change their behavior and also drives new and very profitable industries. Well, what can local government do here in Chilliwack? It turns out they can actually do quite a bit as well. It's easy enough to pass a city bylaw that says no new development, no new building shall have natural gas connected to it. Ergo, they'll have to heat it with electricity, which is mostly renewable, or insulate it properly in the first place. Oh, that sounds draconian, you're thinking. How can you be such a beast to stop them from connecting gas? Well, 40 cities in the US have already done that. We would not be the first. We could do that. We can also have citywide building codes to bring our housing up to passive house standards. We can do that. If you don't know how to build a passive house, BCIT has a course, will tell you all about it, especially if you're an existing builder. In my house, when I got an electric car in, I ran into problems with the electricity. The panel at 100 amps wasn't enough. I had to change it for a 200 amp panel. So in preparation for people traveling electric in the future, it wouldn't be bad to have a building code that said minimum 200 amp service to every building, every residential building. We can also do other things, which is looking at existing buildings, such as if your existing building doesn't have any natural gas connected to it, you get a break on your property tax. That would motivate people. Again, economics is all about incentives. And in order to switch the transition over to electric vehicles, electric transportation, install chargers. The best place in a city like Chillerack to install chargers would be the mall, where people spend a lot of time, or downtown, where people can spend a lot of time shopping. So buses and trains, they have to become cost effective, but if you can do them, they're good. But what about individuals? Well, as an individual, I mentioned earlier, you're only responsible for 15% of Canada's emissions. So that's no big deal. So your best move is to write a letter to your MP, your MLA, and your city councillor, and lobby them. They can make a big difference, even if you can't. And then, of course, once you've written that letter and it comes time to vote, vote well, vote often, as many times as you can, because that is what ultimately is going to make the difference. I mentioned earlier, the climate is determined by the politicians. You have to help the top politicians make the right decisions. You can, as an individual, make your next vehicle zero emission. That's not a bad idea. You'll end up saving money, so why not? If you don't have a heat pump in your house, save up a few pennies and go buy one. And if you have no pennies, take out a loan, because the savings that you'll get from your gas bill when it's not too cold will help pay off the interest on the loan that you use to get the heat pump. Okay? And the other thing you do, I'd say the last thing you can do, is if you've enjoyed these presentations and you know of any group, a church, a club, whatever group, might be interested in having me come out and do a presentation. COVID is fading at this time, so I can come out and give real presentations face-to-face again. I can come out and give presentations. I don't charge anything. A cup of tea and a cookie would be nice, though. Okay, I will stop at this point. And normally, I'd ask for questions at this point, but unfortunately, this is a TV show. Questions not possible. So I wish you a good night. Bye from me.